Welcome, welcome, welcome. David and I are discussing which clock to use. They are not in agreement. So this one's a little later than this one. So David, let's take that one over there. Welcome to Writers Read. And our readers today, our writers and our readers are David Marshak and Susan Platt. My name is Nancy Cope, and we're glad you're here. And here we go with our poem, Paul Niebank's poem. Here we go. Write. Until you get it right.
Until you get it right.
Then read aloud.
And read aloud.
You'll draw a crowd.
You'll draw a crowd.
And bring us great delight.
And bring us great delight.
And we will have some more delight today, for sure. David, good to see you and welcome, and so glad you're reading for us today.
Thank you.
And I emailed the two writers, earlier this week about how did they fit writing into their daily schedule? And a couple reactions immediately were, do I fit it into my daily schedule? So David, would you answer that question in any way you want to?
So most of my writing now is for a blog on Substack, which is an online blogging post, if you're not familiar with it. And you can charge people money, but mine is free. And, you know, I work at posting once a week on Friday. And so basically, I try to have an idea for what I want to write about by Monday, and then get something down, you know, Tuesday or Wednesday, so I have time. You know, and my posts range between kind of 300, 700 words. So, you know, but it's great having a structure.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, writing, you know, when I was writing longer pieces, you know, the only way that I ever wrote anything was to have a schedule and to make myself sit down. You've heard this from writers, I'm sure. You force yourself a particular time. Sometimes there's something to say.
Try. Thank you for sharing that. That's good news about your blog, David. And the two books that you are reading from today, am I right?
Well, one is a book and one is really a pamphlet.
Yes. So would you hold them both up and read the titles for us? And so we can plan here.
Right. So one is called Kids Need the Same Teacher for More Than 1 Year. Quite an imaginative title. The subtitle is The Most Humane Innovation to Improve Education for Your Children. Sure. The Most Humane Innovation to Improve Education for Your Children. And so this was a book that was aimed at a parent audience, pretty much unsuccessfully. And the pamphlet is called Inviting Youths to Claim the Power of Their Imaginations, a guidebook.
Thank you. We're looking forward to getting a chance to read your books. By the way, there are books on the table over here, and they do need to be checked out from the library. So if you borrow a book, please go to the library right away afterwards and check it out. Okay. David, get us started. Okay.
So what I'm going to do, so I'm sure I have time for both, is I'm going to set a timer. And for 11 minutes for the first one, and maybe I did practice, so maybe I will fit it in. But so I'm reading a small section of this. Let's see. Let me find where I'm started. Here we are. It's from the introduction. When we recall our own schooling as adults, it's almost never the subjects or the lessons that come to mind. While the stuff of schooling can be useful, it's the teachers who touched our lives that really mattered. That's what we remember, the teachers who saw our potential when we did not, who challenged us to do better, who believed in us, who supported us, who cared about us. With all the current frenzy about different curriculum, new technologies, and more tests, we seem to have lost track of this simple truth. Relationship matters most, and particularly for young children. Multi-year classrooms where teachers work with the same children and young teens for 2 years or more create deeper and more meaningful relationships between teachers and students. These multi-year classroom relationships promote academic learning as well as social and emotional growth. These multi-year relationships create more of what really matters in schooling. The time to provide your child with a multi-year classroom is now. It can make all the difference in the success of your children's education. Most of us went to elementary schools where every May or June we said goodbye to our teacher, and every August or September we had a new teacher. Most of us went to middle schools or junior highs that followed the same pattern, except we had 4 or 5 teachers to whom we said goodbye, if we had anything to say to them at the end of the year. Most parents continue to send their children to schools, public and private, that follow the same pattern. New teacher in August or September, goodbye every May or June. No matter how much the teacher has learned about the child's strengths and weaknesses, personality, gifts and struggles, learning style, sense of humor, and emotional well-being and needs, no matter how much the child and teacher have come to value and care for each other, no matter how effective the teacher has become at teaching this child, and how effective the child has become at learning with the guidance and care of this teacher. Do parents act in this way with any other part of their parenting lives? Do they find a new pediatrician every autumn, a new dentist, new babysitters? Of course not. But we are all so used to the yearly cycle that most parents and educators never question it. Does it make any sense to discard all that teachers and children have created together over the course of a school year? The knowledge, the relationship, the emotional safety, the mutual respect, the bonding, every May or June. It's irrational and profoundly wasteful. So I'm going to skip ahead here because it goes on. There's a certain didactic quality, exhortatory quality to this book, as you hear. And it goes on for a few more paragraphs with that kind of voice. So how did school get to be like this? When Napoleon Bonaparte, you remember him, the Emperor of France, defeated the army of Prussia, the most powerful German principality, in 1806, leaders of the Prussian state committed themselves to reforming their school system, which was the first wide-scale public school system in human history. One of their reforms was age grading, putting all children who were the same chronological age into the same grade, for example, first grade or fourth grade. This was 130 years before developmental psychology, and it seemed logical and efficient to the Prussian leaders to put all children of the same age together and make them learn the same things. Age grading then led to the idea of giving children a new teacher every year. Indeed, the Prussians intentionally wanted to keep their boys, only boys went to school in 1806, from becoming too emotionally involved with their teachers. This could be prevented if students were shuffled to new teachers every year, every fall. Horace Mann, the most effective American proponent of common schools, what we now call public schools, toured Prussian schools in the early 1840s and advocated for the inclusion of key elements of the Prussian school model in the common schools being founded in Massachusetts. 2 of these elements were age grading and a new teacher every autumn. Many parents and teachers resisted age grading, particularly in small rural communities. It made little sense to people who saw their young people interact with children of various ages every day and learn with the same teacher for many years. It took 60 years of beating down parents' wishes, but eventually age grading became the standard practice in American schools around 1900. And when age grading became the school norm, so did goodbye every June, new teacher every September. Despite several efforts to remove age grading during the 20th century, it's still used in the vast majority of our schools, and so is the practice of assigning children a new teacher every year. So this book got started with a study that I did actually 20 years ago in 4 schools in the Seattle area, which I'll name in a minute. And I finally got this published, I think in 2012. But the depressing thing is that it's as relevant today as it was 20 years ago. So the 4 public schools that are based on multi-year relationships and described in this book include the following. Green Gables Elementary in Federal Way School District. So unfortunately, Green Gables, as far as I could tell from their website, no longer has multi-year relationships. It's gone back to single grade. The Odyssey program in Bainbridge Island Public Schools, which is a K through 8 program, which still wonderfully does exist and is multi-age. And in fact, one of the teachers there from 20 years ago is still there. The Environmental and Adventure School, which is in Lake Washington. It's on Finn Hill in Kirkland, or north end of Kirkland. And this is still there. It's a wonderful K through 9 school that does an incredible job of bringing 6th grade children into 9th grade, adolescence. And then finally, Salmon Bay, which is in Ballard, Salmon Bay School. It's a K-8 school. I couldn't really tell from their website if they still have multi-year relationships or not, but they may well, because Salmon Bay was one of the schools that the Seattle superintendent wanted to shut down. And he wanted to shut down all of the schools of choice. So you can see I'm not particularly a fan of that. So you will see that each of these schools provides personalized learning and growth for each and every child and teen. Personalization means that each child and teen is known as an individual by his or her teacher or teachers, and that the teacher or teachers is providing and supporting learning opportunities and challenges for each child based upon his or her current capabilities and needs. As a parent in one of these schools explained, and I quote, "The benefit that we have experienced here is the relationships that my daughters have established with their teachers. The fact that their teachers know who they are and what their needs are. For my older daughter, her teacher has recognized that she's a very independent learner. So the teacher just has to tell her, this is what I need you to do, and she can go and do it. Whereas my other daughter needs a little more direction, a little more guidance. Over the years, the teachers have come to understand each of my girls' personalities, and they adjust their teaching to fit each of them, which is, I think, absolutely amazing." End of the quote. Largely as a result of the multi-year relationships between students and teachers, and between teachers and parents, each of these schools includes classrooms that bring to life the following characteristics and values, each of which promotes each child's learning and growth, and helps to make school a place for accomplishment and belonging for each child. Safety, care, and respect. Choice, responsibility, and guidance. Laughter and joy. Motivation to learn. Positive parent involvement. More efficient use of school time. So here's another quote from a parent, and I quote, "The wonderful thing about a 3-year class is that your child does not have to spend that time at the beginning of the year with this complete total stranger. The teacher knows where your child was at the end of the last year and can figure out what the child has gained or lost over the summer. The teachers here are good at assessing what were the children's experiences over the summer and how did this possibly add to their education." And that's 11 minutes. So it's good timing. I'll stop there. Okay, so I'm just going to go on, if that's okay. So this is a more hopeful, eventually, hopeful piece, although the beginning starts in somewhat in the same vein. So this is a pamphlet about adolescence, which is a concept that I would like to remove from our language and replace with the word youth, and I'll explain why. G. Stanley Hall coined the term adolescent with his 1904 book, Adolescence, Its Psychology and Its Relation to Physiology, Anthropology, Sociology, Sex, Crime, Religion, and Education. He didn't want to leave anything out, so. Hall was a psychologist, the first president of the American Psychological Association, and the first president of Clark University in Worcester, Mass. What came to define adolescence by the middle of the 20th century was legally mandated school attendance and the exclusion of humans ages 13 to 19 from most of adult life. Here, let me make sure I turn this off. There. Sorry. While Hall was correct in his insight that child and youth development recapitulates human evolution, he misunderstood the capacities of youth in ages 13 to 19 years, focusing more on the negative potentials than their positive ones. From this starting point, our cultural misunderstanding of adolescence has only grown over the past century. We now know that the brain does not reach its full maturation until the mid-20s in most humans. But this does not mean that youth's brain is insufficient for making a positive contribution to the world. Teens and teenagers are labels that only came into usage in the 1950s, by which time the vast majority of people ages 13 to 19 had been conscripted into legally mandated schooling, the teen ghetto, in the United States and other industrial nations. These terms are often used to disparage people in this age group. They should also be discarded, as well as adolescents. Youth is defined as, quote, the appearance, freshness, vigor, spirit, and so on characteristic of one who is young. Those humans who are between the ages of 13 and 19 are young, and these characteristics are accurate for the vast majority of humans in this age group. Youth is also a time of seeing the world with fresh eyes, of feeling the world with a new heart, and responding to the world with the potential for a creative imagination. When we consider youth in the context of evolution, we know that the oldest fossil record of anatomically modern humans is found about 310,000 years ago. We reached full behavioral modernity around 35,000 to 50,000 years ago. For almost all of the tens of thousands of years that we have existed as a subspecies, because if you're not familiar, we're actually Homo sapiens sapiens. That's our subspecies. Humans became adults once they reached puberty. Humans in the ages 13 to 19 lived as adults, worked as adults, had children, and took on all the responsibilities of adults. While Hall coined the term adolescence in 1904, the first significant adolescent population did not appear in the United States and other industrial nations until post-World War II, particularly in the 1950s and 60s. The key social marker of the teen ghetto lockout is the high school. So it took from 1900, when there were roughly 10% of American youth attending high school, to 1960 to get to 87%. So there was a gradual increase in enrollment. During these decades, adolescence evolved from an uncommon experience available mainly to the male children of the wealthy to the normative cultural experience for youth, male and female, in the United States. Other industrial modernist nations have followed a similar trajectory of change. The key insight in these data is this. Within our history as a subspecies, adolescence is a startlingly new phenomenon. And it's not surprising at all that we don't know much about its potential. What did adults do with these tens of millions of adolescents when they first appeared without warning? They sentenced them to 30-plus hours each week of secondary school, plus more hours of homework, even though the paradigm of academic high school had been created in the 1890s for a very different purpose and a very different population. Adults excluded youth from most of adult life and instead dumped them into the age ghetto that quickly became youth culture, where they became easy targets for corporate manipulation. It's not at all surprising that our initial social and cultural responses to the sudden appearance of tens of millions of youths were so misguided. The manifestation of adolescence on a mass scale was a radically new evolutionary step for Homo sapiens. For the first time in our existence as a species, we had an opportunity for tens of millions of individual humans, youths, to explore and develop their human potential, to find their gifts and callings, and to evolve into a much more complex and articulated consciousness. What kinds of experience and social structures would we offer youth if we understood youth rightfully to be a new stage of human development that can allow a more complete unfolding of each human's potential? This is the creative challenge we need to answer today, and we can only create the social structures needed to support and enhance the potential creativity of youth if we free youth from the teen ghetto and integrate them into adult society. Howard Thurman wrote, and this is a quote that many of you are probably familiar with, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." The evolutionary potential of youth as a stage in human development can be realized when great numbers of individual human beings discover in these early years of their lives what it is that makes them come alive, their gifts, their passions, their callings, and they begin to do it. Not later on, not when they're older, but now. And guess what? This is actually beginning to happen. So if I can get my PowerPoint. So one of the fascinating things, so I wrote this some years ago as well, and things change quickly nowadays. So one of the things that the internet and particularly social media have done is they've given people in the ages of 13 to 19 the opportunity to step out of the limitations of being a teenager and step into the adult world and begin making things happen, creating things in the adult world, changing the adult world. And so you're all, of course, familiar with Greta. And, Greta stepped up, out of nowhere and became a global figure. And, but what I would suggest to you is that Greta is in one way unique. There is no other Greta Thunberg. But at the same time, the capacity that she used to become a global figure is not unique. So I'm going to just share with you a couple of other folks. This young man, Boyan Slat, when he was 16, went swimming in the Mediterranean. I think he's Dutch, and found that the Mediterranean was full of plastic. So he decided that he was going to clean it up. And in the 10 years since then, he's created this ocean cleanup nonprofit, which has now developed into a multinational global technological enterprise, which has been supported by a lot of money. And he is in the process of cleaning up plastic in the Mediterranean, but developing technologies that could clean up plastic in every ocean. And his ambition is to clean up the oceans by 2040. So just on a little smaller scale, here's a young woman who, at the age of 15, ran across some folks in her high school who were immigrants, who didn't speak English well, and she decided that she wanted to get to know them. So she created a little program in her own high school, and eventually she began raising money, because one of the powers of social media is that you can go on social media and raise money. And people will give you money if you have a good idea. And you can be 15 or 45 or 75. Not to suggest that anybody should go on social media and raise money. 85. So this young man, it's a similar kind of process. An idealization, a motivation, a personal experience, and then stepping into this notion, well, if I can do this in one place, I can go on social media, I can raise a lot of money, I can do this for a lot of people. And then the evolution, he found a lot of food, he gave the food away, he found that people, to a large extent, didn't necessarily know how to cook healthy meals. So then he started, he hired a chef and began teaching people how to cook. Let's see. So this is actually someone from Bellevue, some couple of years ago, who engaged in high school, at the end of high school, as a senior. I think she went to Bellevue High, and developed a technology, a machine learning web app that any smartphone could use to diagnose sickle cell disease. This is a pretty big deal because, there may be a lot of people in Africa who may have sickle cell disease but have no way of knowing it and no way of getting treatment. They don't know it. So this is another example of the individual youth, doing something particular in one particular location and creating a global organization. And my point in sharing all of this is that these are not common, but they're not uncommon. I believe that Jamie Margolin also is from Seattle. That's what her website says. I've never met her. But she co-founded Zero Hour, which is a youth group, climate change action group, that's engaged in lobbying and also in demonstrations. And maybe, does anybody know her family in the room? Maybe, you never know. It's only Seattle, so. This young man was very involved in, I love that photo. That's in protesting against the governor of Florida and the governor of Florida's discriminating activities. So Gen Z for Change is another nonprofit that's politically active, and he's one of the leaders in that group. And so here's another example of scientific discovery. This young woman in high school, for whatever reason, and I was just looking her up, I'm not quite sure the founding story, but she discovered that beet juice is an indicator of pH changes, and so if you put beet juice in wounds, it'll tell you if the wounds are infected. Pretty remarkable. Beet juice is an indicator of infection in wounds, in human flesh. How she discovered this, I was listening to her talk. I ran out of time. So, and then finally, and this is my pitch. I took advantage of this, making a pitch today. So, the Sunrise Movement was started by two 15-year-old young women 10 years ago, and this is the most active youth movement for the Green New Deal and against climate change. It's been incredibly active. You can see some of the things they've accomplished. And one of the things that impresses me particularly about the Sunrise Movement is that the two women and then their colleagues who founded it and led it for the first 6 years, so when they got to be 20, so they were 15, 16. So 6 years later, they were 22, 23. They'd graduated from college. They were in a different place. They had started 300 different local chapters around the U.S. They were doing a lot of training in high schools. And they sat down, the 22, 23-year-olds, and said, we want the Sunrise Movement to be a youth movement, not an emerging adult movement. And so they went out and they found 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds in their local groups, and they handed the national movement off to the 15, 16-year-olds again. So I found that to be really impressive in the sense that they honored their own original energy that got them started in the first place. And I would encourage you to check them out online. They can always use more money. So if you find them inspiring, I'm trying to get someone involved in Seattle to come and talk about it. So far I haven't been successful, but I'm still working on it. So thank you all very much for coming.
David, thank you so much. And you spoke right to the part of my heart that is my teacher heart. Thank you so much. It was a gift. And David, I forgot to mention that we're going to have Q&A now so that we can focus right on what you've just said. So give some thought to some questions and let's get started. We might need another one of these, although I can move. Okay, questions, Susan Platt. I hope.
So my question, David, is what if the teacher's no good? You don't want to stay with that teacher.
This is the, I used to go out and talk to parent groups about this. I was at Seattle U, and so I would go out and talk to parent groups. And so I would say, first of all, most elementary school teachers are women. most elementary school teachers go into teaching because they care about children. And in my experience, 30 to 40% of elementary school teachers are good to great. And another 50, 60% are, adequate to good. So maybe there's 5% of elementary school teachers that are not good. So what do? Well, if you're not satisfied with the teacher, you go to the principal. And if you're ultimately not satisfied, you get your child transferred to another classroom. Or if the teacher is really a disaster, you get the principal to fire the teacher. So I was assistant superintendent in a public school district in Vermont where we had all of our elementary kids in multi-age classrooms and in 5 years we had one dissatisfied parent. And we just moved the kid to another. So it can happen, and it would happen, but compared to the benefits, it's minuscule, I believe.
Ina.
I got him, Nancy.
Thank you.
Hang on. Thank you.
As far as teachers are concerned, those who are, let's say, incompetent, it's very difficult to move them because the teachers' union, I don't know whether it still has the same strength, but once upon a time, it was impossible to remove a child. And I dealt that with actually 2 teachers in my children's early lives. I mean, it was a group of women, mothers, who went all the way to the superintendent. It was impossible.
Okay.
So it's,
I'm sure
ideal.
that happens, but it's, again, what I would say, Ina, is that it's relatively, it's not the most common thing that happens by far, and that the benefits far outweigh, any possible damages.
Okay, any more? Does she have?
Just quickly, I think you have a wonderful and provocative thesis, and there are other people who have written about this, Philip Arias, about the invention of childhood and so on. But I wonder if there's a causation thing going on, connecting the two. I think at every era, under every school system, wonderful people have emerged that have done dramatic things, no matter how they were taught. And I wondered how much of what we saw at the end is connected to whatever schooling they had at the beginning. They may be completely disconnected phenomena.
Well, that would require a study that somebody would have to do other than me, so I don't know. It's an interesting hypothesis that would be explored, but, I think, the lure and the power of social media is pretty universal among people of those ages. They're pretty much all on it. And the aspiration to do good, to make the world a better place, to help in adolescence, I'm not the word I'm trying to stop using, in youth, it's there if we pay attention to it. And this is the fundamental, one of the fundamental beliefs I have from working with youth, for 40 years, is that, a lot of the alienation and disrespect, and I remember in my own life, when I was that age, comes from being disrespected, comes from not being invited to contribute, comes from being separated. And then, of course, it builds on itself, which some of us may remember from back in the day when we were that age. So,
Well, thank you so much,
you.
David. Rich session and food for thought, for sure. Okay, Susan, I have spent a couple of hours today even on your wonderful book. Her title, this is by her newest book. How many have you written?
5.
5. And so this publishing date is 25, is it not? I said, how did she write a book in 2025? Anyway, the title of her book is, first of all, Around the World in 25 Years. Then secondly, subtitle, Provocative Art from Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the Americas. So Susan, welcome.
Thank you.
We're so glad to hear your voice.
Does this
Okay.
thing work? I don't know what to do with it.
Is she,
Just put it down. Okay.
okay, yeah,
Thank you very much, Linda.
okay. So, what are you going to read for us from your book today?
Are you going to ask me that question?
Yeah, are you ready for it?
I am. I am.
That was the question about how much writing time do you get to put in every day? And I think it was Susan that kind of grimaced and said
Yeah.
she wished she could put it into every day.
I'm incredibly jealous of David's organization, planning every week. I think that's fabulous, and I have to find out what is this Substack thing, why it's sort of an odd corner of the world. I do have a blog, but I'm not systematic like David. I write for several local publications, but it's not orderly every day. It's deadline driven. Yeah. So I want to reform.
Well, he would applaud you staying in touch with your own style. See?
Okay.
Is that right, David?
Well, so today I'm going to read the chapter in this book about my visit to China in 1995. It was the International Non-Governmental Forum on Women, Art, and Culture that took place in Huairou, China. It was supposed to take place in Beijing, but the Chinese authorities were so scared of us, they moved us to a small place. And while we were there, they were building the facility. But at any rate, I thought it might be interesting for you to see. This is the program that I found from the conference. And if you'll notice, the logo of the conference is somewhat affiliated with the cover of my book. I asked the designer, I don't think we can use this because it's copyrighted, but he went ahead and adapted it into arrows. This is women flinging around the world. So that's kind of exciting. And the chapter is based on several articles that I wrote when I came back, like this one, Woman Attends Worldwide Forum. That's a pretty cool headline. Or this was in the Dallas Morning News. Don't let me knock your thing out. Searching for Equality Through Art. And then a couple of other places I wrote essays. So I put them together. And when I was practicing with Henry, I discovered there was some places where I could have cut a little. There was some repetition. But we won't worry about that, will we? Okay, so I have a slideshow. It's not perfectly coordinated with the text, so there may be a few glitches, but we'll try. Okay, there we are. At the Forum on Women, Art, and Culture, politics were everywhere. There were politics of seduction, of affirmation, of oppression, and of resistance. Seduction was obvious at the grandiose opening pageant at the Workers' Stadium in Beijing. The Chinese intended to make us feel happy, joyful, welcome, so that we could forget the problems we had getting to Beijing, and we wouldn't feel like creating any problems now that we had finally arrived. The opening ceremony, which took place after the formal speeches, was a pageant as only the Chinese can create. It included thousands of Chinese girls and women dancing in brilliantly colored costumes, including a dragon dance never before performed by women, and the release of 20,000 doves and balloons, along with a blimp and a huge kite with the NGO logo, which is on the cover of the magazine. So this was all over the place. An all-female orchestra, dressed entirely in white robes, played Beethoven's Ode to Joy and Auld Lang Syne, and encouraged all 50,000 of us to join in. Underscoring contemporary ideological transitions, this seductive pageantry was adopted in part from the massive young pioneer demonstrations staged in honor of the revolution only a few years earlier. Oh, is this the thing to change the slide here? Let's see what happens. Whoops. There's something before that. Did I hit it several times? That's the slide I want. Outside the arena, here we are, Unofficial pageantry included spontaneous dancing and singing by women in brilliant ceremonial dress from all over the world. A spirit of exuberance burst beyond the confines of the official pageant. We were all thrilled and forgot our problems momentarily. The main point of the non-governmental organization forum, or NGO, let's see, is this how it works? Yeah, that's the entrance, one of the entrances, was not the nervous concerns of Chinese officials, nor was it mainly about confrontational demonstrations such as those seen in the American television coverage. It was about thousands of women and men looking for positive solutions to the problems of poverty, access to health and education, and violence against all women on the planet. The slogan of the conference, and you can just see it on that second billboard over there, was equality, development, and peace. The forum included 50,000 women and men from 186 countries. There was a thrilling cultural diversity and a pervasive enjoyment and respect for that diversity. Among the Muslim women, for example, there were women with no veil, women with only a veil on their heads, and women who were covered except for their eyes. I think I forgot to mention this slide. Does it work? Oops, back. I wanted to mention, this is in my book, that organizing this worldwide conference was not done by an internet at that time. This is the extent of the internet in 1995. We mostly used telephone faxes. We didn't even have very good email. So, the delegation from India included women of all castes. Do I need to point at the screen in order to make it work, maybe? Maybe, I don't know. What? Point at the machine. We're up there? Is that it? Is that what happens? You point at that thing? I'm sorry. Yeah, that would. Yeah, that'd be great. I think this thing is falling off. Is it all right? Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's see. The next slide, please. Okay. The delegation from India included women of all castes. And Japanese women came in spite of the fact that China was marking the anniversary of the Japanese invasion of China. Next, please. These women were all influential in their communities. You can see she has an NGO dress here. Or they would not have managed to get to China at all. I could feel their strength just by looking at them. They were not the people that you would encounter as a tourist in these countries. Much more significant than the difficulty of traveling to China or within China were the difficulties that these women faced, have personally surmounted in their own lives and in the communities from which they came. All of the women at the NGO conference were grassroots organizing who were really making a difference in the world. In the midst of back please. Okay. The purpose of the NGO conference was to be an activist lobby to influence the official United Nations conference in Beijing. Okay, next please. That's it. I went to the NGO forum with a national and international delegation representing the Women's Caucus for Art, a feminist art organization, but I was also the sole delegate from the International Association of Art Critics. We included artists from throughout the United States, Canada, Ireland, Great Britain, Mexico, and Korea. Next, please. Our panels, workshops, performances, and videos address the same issues as others at the conference. Next, please. You might have spotted that was me in the panel. I could tell. You could. Egotistical. This is a Spider Women performance addressing violence against women, the importance of community, the role of collaboration, concern for environmental problems. We presented art as a means for peaceful solutions to global concerns. Our lobby to the United Nations protested the obstruction and suppression of artistic expression. Okay, next. Okay, blank, that's what I want, leave it. For me, the euphoria of the opening pageant was particularly brief. The next day, I went with several other artists and a local art critic to visit an artist community in Beijing, since I was the Art Critics Association representative. We discovered that because of the Women's Conference, the Chinese government had removed the artists, the so-called vagabonds, from the village of Wanmingwan, a type of Greenwich Village near Tsinghua University. These artists had chosen to be independent artists rather than pursue government sponsorship. They were mainly trying to sell their work directly to foreign businessmen in Beijing. We visited two artists, a husband and wife, who had not been removed. One painted expressionist art, the other 19th century European-style landscapes. After a cup of tea, they asked us to buy a work for $1,500, an offer we had no difficulty in refusing. As we left their tiny home, these were peasant houses with no plumbing or electricity, we were detained by the police as a result of a tip-off from an elderly woman wearing a red armband who stood by and pointed at us with hostility. I, with my companions, were held for several hours of questioning as we worked our way up through the ranks of police officers. The last one, who spoke English perfectly, finally accepted my official letter from the Art Critics Association asking me to visit artists, which I had translated into Chinese, but told us to stay at the Women's Conference. When they finally let us go, I was unable to communicate for the rest of my time in China with the art critic who had accompanied us, and he was told that I was no longer at the hotel when he tried to reach me. Other people told me that my phone was tapped and I was being followed. But true to the contradictions of China, that very same evening, the youngest women artists who were included in a special display at the National Art Gallery all turned up at the hotel. I don't know what happened to the artists that I visited, but I was terrified to visit the women at the hotel for fear of reprisals against them. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. The artists at the hotel had been taken officially at the They were showing officially at the National Art Gallery, and our group had just been taken through the show. Art on the ground floor included realist expressions sponsored by the official art academies in China, as here is an example, Zhao Jininxin, Lady in a Private Chamber, showing a bride from the Yi nationality. While such work is propaganda art, sorry, I'm having a little bit of a problem here. It is also genuinely fascinating as a cultural production in a changing society, where ethnicity and contemporary pop culture coexist with communism and the awesome history of culture in China. Incidentally, art sanctioned under communism, as well as earlier traditional Chinese art, excludes that cliche of Western art, paintings of the female nude. Although this official show contained frequently intriguing layers of meaning, it stopped, oh dear. What was that? Where did it go? Oh, okay, I'll just skip it. My hearing aid fell out. I can manage. Anything that I could decipher as critical. The slogan of the show, as announced in the catalog, was constantly producing works of art during the long, hard years. This was most likely a reference to the hiatus caused by the Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when all the schools were closed and intellectuals were sent to the countryside. The artists in the show, who were born in the 1940s, had mostly finished their education at that point, but their professional careers were interrupted. One artist, for example, spent 9 years on a collective farm in the remote Yunnan province from 69 to 78. Even the tour guides acknowledged that the Cultural Revolution was a disaster, both in the production of contemporary art and in the destruction of older art for Chinese culture. In fact, to understand contemporary China at all, it is necessary to realize the depth of the terror and destruction caused by the Cultural Revolution. Next slide, please. The government also sanctioned a display of recent modernist art curated by a young critic, Lao Wen, who is part of the international art scene. Made up mostly of younger artists, and I actually have a catalog from that show, which you could look at after the talk, Women's Approach to Chinese Contemporary Art. Included women like this artist, Lu Liping. Of the artists in the official show, many of them still based in China, although they travel abroad, they continue to teach in government-sponsored academies. Their work was not obviously political, although careful reading revealed some possibly cloaked references. This one is a green maze. Green maze is sort of an interesting subject. Song Han's, next slide, please. Fear of Borning might be taken as a comment on birth control and abortion. Next slide, please. Shui Wei's works with recycled materials like discarded calligraphy paper or bamboo have a connection to traditional Chinese media, even as she's cutting it up and transforming it. Next slide, please. The government refused to install proliferation of thread winding by Lin Tian Mao. Instead, they included only a small photograph of the installation, balls of thread unraveling from a bed filled with needles. Lin attended school at the Art Students League in New York City and showed in international exhibitions. She is no longer part of the Chinese system. Perhaps this is the reason she was censored. Note, Lin Tian Mao has subsequently become an extremely prominent Chinese artist internationally. Next slide, please. Both Lin and her sister, you see me again, and that's her sister there, Sophia Lin. And on the right, those are several artists, and the woman in the second from the left is her Lin Tian Mao. We're among the artists who unexpectedly came to our hotel in Beijing. Next slide, please. The conference site itself was an international space, a United Nations compound inside of China, where women from 180 countries intensely addressed solutions to the many problems facing women in the world today, primarily the violation of their human rights. It focused on sexual slavery, female circumcision, violence against women, environmental issues like toxicity and the need for shelter, child prostitution, and economic power for women. Within the site, the art addressed these issues, but if a banner, march, or display came even close to the perimeter of the conference, it was stopped and turned around. Next slide, please. For example, this one, for supporting lesbians. Other than police, pageants, and banners, the most prominent Chinese presence at the conference were minority women who displayed their costumes, offered us goods, and provided traditional dance and music. The presentation of minority cultures as a form of entertainment, is part of the government system of repression. There were government-sanctioned Han and minority speakers on panels, particularly those on family planning, but none of the Chinese artists whom the WCA had contacted directly without going through government channels, were permitted to attend. Let's see what happens. What's the next slide? Oh, yes. The WCA created an exhibition. It doesn't look like much here. Created an exhibition of color Xeroxes and prints that we could hand carry to China. Next slide, please. As the show vanished, day by day, during the course of the forum, we couldn't tell if it was censorship or merely people seeking souvenirs. Next slide, please. In addition, we had a booth with a large piece by Marita Dingus on the left. Are you familiar with Marita Dingus? She created that figure in the center. And also another booth that showed aspects of the WCA. We presented art as a means for peaceful solutions to global concerns. Okay, let's see, where am I here? Blank. Next slide, please. I was riveted by some of the keynote speakers. Susanna Unay was a dynamic representative from the Kanak in French New Caledonia. She has been an activist with the Pacific Concerns Resource Center for 30 years. She spoke forcefully of the nuclear testing in the Pacific and how it would affect the life of the people in Polynesia. Susanna Unay died in 2016. Maria Kurbasova of Russia represented the Gaia International Women's Center. She passionately described how her group helped mothers to find their sons during the war in Chechnya. Catriona Ruana of the Center for Research from Northern Ireland spoke of colonization as the underlying reason for militarization and violence in that tormented country. She emphasized the dilemma of her own life, caught between her desire to make the world safer for her 3-year-old daughter by speaking and organizing, or by simply staying home with her in a place filled with violence. Okay, let's see. In addition to these and other prominent speakers, there were also panels led by local grassroots organizers who were working in less famous places to make their street or their home a better place. So let's go on to the next slide. 6 women from the Asian Women's Human Rights Council presented their solutions to housing problems for women living in slum conditions. Maori women from New Zealand told of creating 25 affiliated groups to address the problems of their colonized culture. Women from, next slide please, Ivory Coast, Uganda, Nigeria, Mozambique, and Ghana shared a panel on the problems of the girl child in Africa that spoke of female circumcision. You can't read this very well, but these are some of the issues there. And the next slide, please. Spoke of female circumcision, child labor, next slide, and prostitution. This is I thought one of the most amazing posters at the conference about trafficking children. On an even more informal level, in hundreds of inflatable tents near the main entrance were workshops and strategy sessions. Women from India addressed the problem of arranged child marriage. The Women's World Bank spoke of economic empowerment for women. A woman from Honduras spoke of a craft cooperative. Next slide, please. There were workshops on toxic pesticides, access to equal educational opportunities. One of the themes, next slide please, of the conference was that in a violent world, it is women and children who are the victims and the refugees. The disruption and destruction of home and family is the inevitable result of war. Throughout the NGO grounds, posters, quilts, which you've been seeing a few of, and paintings addressed disarmament. Next slide, please. Resistance to imperialism, the right to food and water, and access to power. These are 2 large images about imperialism and nuclear power. And then go ahead, the next slide. And the next. A peace tent was surrounded by collaboratively made paintings and quilts asking for an end to nuclear testing. This is one of the peace quilts. Art and politics were everywhere intertwined at the NGO conference. For those of us in the WCA, seeing art and culture so embedded in politics and life was in stark contrast to the art world in America with its careful exhibitions of framed and lighted paintings. The art at the forum spoke of a much more complex position for art and culture in today's global economy. The NGO Forum on Women presented women from all over the world alternatives to violence in the world. I came home full of hope for the future.
Turn this on. Thank you so much.
I hope it wasn't too long.
Now, one of Susan's colleagues in her arena wrote her introduction to her book, and the person who wrote it said, Susan doesn't get much sleep. I can imagine, Susan, when do you sleep? This is incredible. So,
Thank
by
you.
the way, the books over here, if they have a large capital, mean they're from our library and need to be checked out. But here is a copy of Susan's book that I'm going to put right over here, so you're welcome to
This
choose
is the
it.
catalog from the Women's Art Show.
And we
And
will
this is
take questions for Susan now. If anybody has any questions.
Any questions? No questions. Somebody ask a question.
Oh, good.
Oh, Linda has a question. Oh, Joan has a question.
No, I just have a comment that Susan is from Leshai, where I lived for 50 years, and she's written a column about art and politics in the Leshai News for how many years, Susan?
Since 2011.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a very good piece.
Thank you.
There's a lot of good writers in that little newspaper.
Oh, it's wonderful paper.
How often does that paper get published? Is it weekly, month?
Once a month. Yeah.
Oh, Susan.
Susan,
Yes.
how different is it now, 20 years later?
How different in China?
How different is all the issues that you've discussed today?
I haven't been back.
No, but here, wherever, in the world.
Oh, well, you know, it was good until a month ago.
Any more questions? Thanks so much for coming today.
There's a question.
Oh, there's a question, Susan. Good for you to spot the question. Here we go.
Perhaps I just didn't get it, but you initially referred to the conference as the NGO. Did it have, was it whose conference was it? I didn't get that clear. I certainly got it clear that it was a huge gathering of women's, probably NGOs, but who sponsored
the
it?
non-governmental organizations refer to a worldwide group of organizations that are unaffiliated with governments, and they do their own fundraising. I actually didn't know the term until I got there, because in '95 they were just starting to come up. But it was like an affiliate conference to the official Beijing Women's Conference that took place in Beijing and was much more formal and, organized.
So any NGO developed by women could have applied to it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, grassroots groups from all over the world, non-governmental organizations. Yeah.
Okay. Take care. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
The sun is still out. Thanks for coming.